Who exactly should be called an expat? This is a topic that has sparked a lot of debate in the comments and with us, and that's what this video is about.
One of our friends named Doug recently shared a heartfelt post that reminded us just how important this conversation really is. The difference between expat and immigrant might seem small, but it's loaded with meaning and often misunderstanding. This isn't just about definitions, it's about privilege, perception, and the labels that we use when people move across borders.
Merriam-Webster defines expatriate as a person who lives in a foreign country, typically without the intention to stay permanently. An immigrant, on the other hand, is someone who moves with the intention of making a new life there permanently.
So really the difference comes down to intention. If you're abroad short-term for work, lifestyle, or exploration, you're an expat. If you're moving with the intention to stay, you're an immigrant. Simple enough, right? But in pop culture and in media, these two words are not treated equally. And that's where things get a little tricky.
I know when my family immigrated to the United States, my grandparents never had the intention of moving there permanently. My grandmother, in fact, had a business that she kept in Guatemala and had somebody else managing it, but she always had the intention of moving back, and she was never considered an expat. My grandparents were immigrants.
So Francisco, what do you see yourself as?
I see myself as an immigrant. It's funny because I was born in Guatemala. And my mom and I flew to San Francisco back in the days when you could buy a ticket on Pan Am and fly coach straight into the United States legally. And growing up, I saw myself as an immigrant. And then moving here, same thing. We immigrated to Mexico. We set up shop here. In your situation, since you are Mexican by your father and you live in Mexico, would you consider yourself a local, a Mexican?
No. Well, mine is interesting because I have dual citizenship. I just don't consider myself an expat. I consider myself more of an immigrant than anything else.
The term expat has become associated with wealthy, often white, professionals who move abroad for lifestyle, work, or retirement. Think of forums expat life, expats in Mexico, expat living. Man, I can go on and on.
Go on and on.
The word sounds a little elevated, right? Meanwhile, immigrant is a word we often see tied to economic struggle, hardship, or even fear. And that's where the distortion begins.
It's common to hear the word immigrant used to describe people, usually brown skin, working class, crossing borders for survival, not scenery. Even when their intent is temporary, they're still labeled immigrants. That's not just inaccurate, it's unjust.
Well, that's the issue at hand, right?
I think it's almost automatic. Like if you're Hispanic or Asian or any other race that's not white, then you're automatically an immigrant. But if you're British or European, then you're an expat.
Yeah, that's how it's become standard.
Yes.
Even though by definition, race has nothing to do with it.
Exactly.
Yeah. According to a BBC article we found, this difference in labeling is often fueled by assumptions around race and class. And it's not just the media, it's in our everyday language.
Our friend pointed out something really important. Many people crossing into the US from Mexico or Central America are actually expats by definition. They're not trying to stay forever. They're working temporarily to send money home. And living in Mexico, we've met many who have returned home on their own, not deported. But expats are not how they're described. Instead, they're labeled as immigrants or worse, illegals, even when their situation mirrors that of many North Americans living abroad.
Meanwhile, USians, Canadians, and Europeans in Mexico are almost universally referred to as expats, even if they've lived here for decades, even if their tourist visa expired.
The truth is these labels carry weight. One group is seen as noble explorers, while the other is seen as desperate or even dangerous.
And this is why what we say matters, because words shape perception. And for many Mexican nationals, it feels deeply unfair.
We've heard this sentiment from locals. Imagine seeing your family members, hardworking, humble people, described as immigrants, while every light-skinned newcomer gets the elevated title of expat. What do you think a Mexican who has a lot of money and they move to Spain to live, and they're going to live there for a long time, are they expats or are they immigrants?
If you're asking me, they're immigrants. They could be in the top 1% of the economic scale.
Yeah.
But if they immigrated to Spain and set roots there, or if they immigrated to the United States and sent their kids to Harvard or whatever, they're immigrants in my book.
And I only mention that because we just recently saw a story about very wealthy Mexicans who are all moving to Madrid, and they're gentrifying Madrid. That's a whole other topic, but it made me think of what would they be considered when they move to Spain? How did the Spaniards see wealthy Mexicans who moved to Madrid? I don't know. That'd be an interesting question.
I mean, so far, the country of Spain has made it very, very easy for people that have been born in countries that are ex-colonies to fast track their way through the system and become citizens of Spain. So at least the government doesn't seem to have an issue with it, but I wonder how the people in the neighborhoods that are being displaced feel about that. And let's talk about the systems themselves. Our friend noted that immigrating to Mexico from the US is often faster, cheaper, and even more welcoming than the other way around. A reality most people don't see. And that was our experience too. As long as we met the requirements to come to Mexico, and many of you watching us have seen how easy it is really, if you have the financial means to come to Mexico. Some do it with just a Social Security pension, but not the other way around.
When we first moved to Mexico, did you consider yourself an expat or an immigrant?
I've always considered myself an immigrant. I not once thought of myself as an expat. I was a little confused because I would always see it online as we were doing our research. It's always pages directed towards expats.
Yeah.
Yeah, regarding people that are moving away from the States to somewhere else. So that was a little challenging because I never saw myself. I never saw us as expats moving to Mexico. Not then and not now.
Maybe because it just seems a little uppity
to
say expat.
Yeah, I don't even know if I understood that back then at 35 when we were moving. It just never sat well with me.
I think maybe because we grew up in Hispanic families in a city with a lot of minorities. And so it seemed like a far stretch to call myself an expat.
Yeah, when none of them were considered expats.
Yeah.
Even though a lot of them were.
We hear the term, in the United States, you hear the term immigrant a lot. Immigrant. And so I think maybe that's what we were programmed to see ourselves as when we left and moved to Mexico. And we're not wealthy and we don't have tons of money. So I always saw expats as, in all of our travels, when we've gone to many countries, I always saw like the British and the Australians that were living in Thailand or Cambodia, the places that we visited, I almost saw them as expats. Maybe because they call themselves expats. What was the place?
Subconsciously, you were going with that popular culture definition of what an expat is.
I think I was.
Yeah.
What do you think makes someone feel like an immigrant versus an expat?
I guess it depends on the person, right? I personally never associated any kind of feeling towards the word. I just considered myself an immigrant, period. And I didn't see that as a derogatory word in any way. I'm an immigrant. I immigrated to the United States, and now I immigrated from the United States to Mexico. But I think there are situations where people from Mexico are going, like the seasonal laborers that go and pick the crops in Mexico, and they do it legally.
Yeah, and they're not there to stay.
And they just go and they go for the season, they work, and then they come back.
Yeah, no one would ever call them an expat.
But by definition, they are expats.
By definition, they are.
And yet everybody would just consider them immigrants. Maybe they don't even think about it. They're too busy trying to make a buck and provide for their families. But I don't think if they really sat down and analyzed the word, they wouldn't appreciate the differentiation.
Even someone living on a modest Social Security check here may enjoy access to housing, healthcare, and safety that many working class Mexicans can't. The economic privilege adds another layer to this conversation.
And in fact, the people that do come
Yeah.
with Social Security pensions, what are they doing? They're moving to another country permanently to seek a better life, right? Because if they stayed in the United States, they would struggle with the income.
They can't afford living in the U.S. Yeah.
And yet they're seen as expats here.
Yeah. They really are immigrants.
So how do we describe ourselves? We live full-time in Mexico. We're permanent residents. Antonieta even has a Mexican citizenship through her father. We weren't born here, but we've built a life here.
So are we expats? Are we immigrants? Something else?
And if we took off and lived out of a suitcase for the next 5 years, traveling country to country, what would that make us? The point is, it's not just about where you're from. It's about why you move and how long you plan to stay.
Another point our friend made, one that really hit us, is about how different the immigration experience is depending on the direction you're going. And even modest income foreigners living off of Social Security often enjoy privileges here that many local Mexicans don't because of global economic disparities. Do you think there's ever a time where using the word expat causes harm even if it's unintentionally?
That's something maybe you guys watching can comment on, but it obviously bothers a lot of people, and it's a trigger word for many, and that's why we get so many comments.
Yeah.
It's not like using a bad word. I mean, it's not a bad word. Have you ever felt uncomfortable when somebody refers to you as expat? Does it make you feel like you've been given an unearned status?
I don't think it would bother me. I'm pretty easygoing that way. So I don't think that if someone called me an expat that I would be offended or that it would hurt my feelings somehow. At the same time, like our health insurance is considered expat health insurance. Although if you're buying health insurance, many times if you're buying health insurance, it's because you plan on living there for a very long period of time.
Well,
they don't call it immigrant insurance.
They don't call it immigrant insurance, and you have to have a residency in a foreign country.
Yes.
To qualify for that insurance.
Which means you live abroad, not in the US,
yeah.
And therefore you're not an expat by definition.
By definition. You might be if you're considering maybe coming back after a year or two. So
it's complicated, and maybe we should just do away with these two terms.
Yeah, it would be so easy just to call everybody immigrants. Call it what it is. Why differentiate?
Maybe expat is just an outdated term
yeah.
that used to be used and made sense, but it doesn't necessarily make sense anymore. What do you all think? Please comment below and let us know what your thoughts are. What do you think people miss when they say that it's just a word?
I think they might miss that some people are offended by that word. It's a sensitive word, especially if people have family members that have left their home country. For example, Mexicans that have a family member that has gone to the United States to work temporarily in order to provide for their families back home. And there's never an intention for that family member to stay in the United States, and oftentimes they come back. But yet they're considered immigrants and they're looked down upon. I think that's why it's important. And that's why I think we should embrace the word immigrant and not look at it as a derogatory term. And you might say, well, I'm not using it in a derogatory way. Some people see it that way, but I'm saying instead of seeing it as a derogatory term, embrace it. I'm an immigrant. Everybody's an immigrant that has moved away from their homeland to live somewhere else in a different country. Look, we're not trying to play language police here. As our friend said, semantics are tricky. Words are just sounds we assign meaning to, but sometimes those meanings carry weight, especially in times like these.
So maybe we should ask ourselves, why do we call some people expats and others immigrants? And who gets to decide? Or maybe it's time to stop using expat as a status badge. Maybe the real question isn't what we call ourselves, but why we make the distinction in the first place.
Let us know what you think in the comments. Should everyone living abroad be called an expat or an immigrant? Does the difference still matter? If you're planning to move abroad, what do you think you should be asking yourself about these labels? How would you handle this? What would you call yourself? And do you think that there's a better way to describe each other and ourselves without using these loaded labels? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Let's meet down below.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.